Hello folks, Kaz here from blockheadUK. When building Micropolis blocks, it's very easy to stack one brick on top of another and end up with square boxes much like these, Candy Court on the left and Apis Heights on the right. Whilst they're not too bad in themselves, if all of your Micropolis blocks end up looking like this, it can be very square. So here are some suggestions about breaking out of the square box and making some more interesting shapes. These are two examples of rectangular boxes which have had additional elements added to them to give them a little bit more interest. On the right we see Kina House, where I've added these bionicle pieces to give the sides some more texture. And on the left we see the Mtron Tower with the addition of these window pieces which came from very old Mtron space sets, which means again that the box isn't just rectangular and there's a bit more interest visually when you're looking at the box. In these two examples we've used basic rectangular or square shapes, but together in conjunction with other rectangles we've provided some more interesting overall shapes. On the left hand side we see White's Place, which is an L-shaped footprint, and that gap in the middle gives it a little bit more visual interest than just being a big square box. On the right hand side we see Pumpkin House, which is basically made of 4 squares, but they've been placed together such that the squares are offset slightly, and that makes a much more interesting, more jagged footprint for the build, and overall is more visually appealing than another square box would have been. The next few examples show some repetition but with some variation, which photographically I find is really pleasing, and that comes through with my model building too. In this instance, Limehouse Flats, we've got some different window pieces here for the repetition on a small scale, and then each of the blocks is repeated pretty much identically with the addition of some sort of slight changes in the window positions. And then if you look at the plan of this, again we've got rectangles but offset to each other, which has given some interest in the plan form. This model, called System House, shows some repetition in terms of the actual shape of each block being identical, but the variation in colour makes it more interesting. We've also offset each block a little way further into the front of the block to give yet more variation as we see the thing from the side or above. So repetition with variation in colour, texture, shape or position can be really important in your Micropolis builds. Another idea for repetition. This time each block is the same colour and pretty much built the same way per floor, but we've got a variation in height which gives more visual interest, particularly from this angle. I've also offset the buildings as well, so that there's a front to back difference, and that makes a really nice footprint when you're looking at the block more from above. So yet again a slightly different sort of repetition, but with variation, can be really pleasing. These two examples show repetition and variation on a smaller scale than previously. On the right here, Pipistrel Plaza has floors which are very similar to each other. However, the ground floor is larger in height than the others, as is the case with some offices usually. And then once again we've gone for rectangles but placed in slightly different positions to give us that off-square shape, sort of indented L shape, which is quite attractive and then gives plenty of room for interesting foreground. On the left hand side we have Carmine Heights, which I built recently. It's basically many examples of this single module, but placed on top of each other in such a way that we've got variation in height for each of the towers. There's a little bridge between them as well, and those stacked together give us more interest than just straight up towers all of the same height or all in the same position. These two are examples of modular buildings which have been put together with repeating elements, either stacked or twisted, in various angles. On the left we have Pisa Court, which is basically made up of these 6x4 elements here with a plate, some transparent windows underneath, and then they've been stacked together with a slight offset like that to give that slanting effect going up for each block. Meanwhile, on the right we have Shildon Heights, and once again these are very straightforward similar blocks built on a 4x4 plate with some 1x1 transparent windows, and they've just been stacked on a slight angle to give a twist in the building, which makes it look much more interesting than if they were all just stacked up together like this. This example is called Conning Towers. Basically, again made of stacks of very similar repeating elements placed together. We've got variation in height here with the different towers, and also placement on the base plate. So I've angled them at 45 degrees, which makes things really interesting then, rather than mounting them square onto the streets. Here are two more examples of buildings mounted on an angle to the streets. On the left we see Obsidian House, one of my very early Micropolis modules. It's mounted onto the base plate at 45 degrees, and as well as having that as an interesting point, I've also used lots of round tiles to try and break up the square aspect of things. It moves a little bit because it's mounted with a turntable element, but these two statues down at the bottom help to stop the building turning too far, as does the two square elements at the back here. So that can be useful to stop your building twiddling round. Similarly with this one, which is the Hearts Nightclub and Casino, again mounted on an angle, but this time not at 45 degrees but at a slightly different angle on the base plate. And this is achieved again by using a turntable element. The little lobbies here on front and back stop the thing from turning too far round. If we take those off, we find that there we are, it's mounted on a turntable. In fact, this part here has stayed on the turntable, and if that wasn't constrained by these little anti-lobbies here, we would find that the building would turn around rather too much. So that can be a good way of constraining the position of the element within the base plate. In the first example on the left, Telecom Tower, we've got 3 cubes, but they've been mounted at angles to each other for the 3 levels to give some more visual interest. This has been achieved by putting them on with 4 2x2 jumper plates, like this, which can be quite effective too, but that does give you a very specific angle that you have to stick to. On the right here we see Rainbow Plaza. The interest in this one has been achieved with basically a 4x6 plate in the middle, extended on each side to make a cross shape, with the addition of these wheel arch pieces, 2x2 with wings on the side, all the way up in white to give the idea of balconies. And once again, this has been mounted on the block with a turntable piece like this, and these 2 little studs here are serving the same purpose to stop the thing from turning round too much. So far we've pretty much still been talking about rectangular or cuboid shapes, but this one, Serpentine House, has ended up completely different on the plate. Each element has started off with rectangles here, but the addition of these A plates between each one of the main blocks has given the overall S shape with the finished model. And that can be a really nice way of using things like those angled plates to provide some really interesting shapes for the model. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel so you can see new content when it is released.